In the last video, we introduced the idea of while loops. While loops are the simplest thing we have in Java in order to do looping, or maybe more generally, repetition or iteration, right? The goal is to do the same thing a bunch of times, which is something we end up doing a lot in programming languages. You can think maybe your program gets this huge data set, and in that data set, you need to perform the same action a bunch of times, right? Maybe you have a list of numbers, and you need to check to see whether any of them are divisible by 10. You're going to be repeating that same action again and again and again. That's what looping mechanisms allow us to do. Next, what we're going to be looking at is what is called the do while loop, which is similar to a while loop, but the logic works out a little bit differently. So let me start with a quick example here, and we'll type through this. Let's look at printing out the numbers between 1 and 10. The first thing I'm going to do is put in a variable to count what number I'm currently at. So I'm going to put in an integer, call it I, and I'm going to start it at 1, right, to represent, the first thing I want to do is print out the number 1. And then I can put in my do while loop. And this is where you'll start to see the difference. So instead of typing the word while, like I would for a while loop, I'm going to actually type the word do. Then open parenthesis, and then I'm going to need to match with a close one. And then at this end here, this is where I'll type in the word while. So I'm going to write while I less than 11, right? Because I want this thing to loop, loop, loop until I is equal to 10, right? That's the last value I want to print out. Now, going inside the body of this do loop, I'm going to actually put it in my code. So let me put in first a print statement. And this is what we'll use to display the value of I as this thing runs, as it loops. So there you go. I have a displayed letter I, and then print the contents of the I variable. And then I'll also put in here, right, my incrementer, I++, to represent that I'm increasing I every time I run this program. So let's compile and run this. In the bottom window, I get my output. So here we can see it prints out I1, I2, I3, and so on until it gets to I10. Right? So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to print all those numbers out from 1 to 10. Now at this point you might be thinking, I could do that exact same thing with a while loop. So what is the point of a do loop? But the difference is that check to see whether the loop is done happens at the end, right? So it happens over here where I put the keyword while. This means that your code inside the while loop is guaranteed to run at least once. In something like a while loop, that's normally the place where we check to see if the loops continue or not, right? So in that case, right, a while loop, there's a chance that it may never run at all, right? If that condition, right, if the condition, that Boolean expression is false, a while loop would never run. Do loop is slightly different. Do loop is set up to check its condition afterwards, right? So it's going to for sure run this bit at least once. So that is the key difference, right? Where does it check the condition? A natural question to ask is when we'd want to do something like that. Well, one example would be something like prompting the user, right? We always want to prompt the user at least once, right? There shouldn't be a case where we don't give the user an option. So let's actually write a bit of code to do that, just as a quick example. So let's say I'm reading in a string from the user. The first thing I'm going to do is put in a package because I need to import the code for scanner. So let me start by putting an import statement up at the top, and I'll go import java.util.scanner. That's the line that I need in order to get access to the object that lets me read and stuff. And over here, let me put in a couple of new variables. First of all, I'm going to put in a variable called string, and we'll just call it input. And that'll be a variable I use to hold whatever the user types. Then I'm going to also create a scanner object, because without a scanner object, I can't actually read anything, right? I need some place to get data from. And I'll just call it scan, and we'll do scanner equal scan equal new scanner system.in, right? System.in just represents that we're taking in input, right? We're taking input from the keyboard. Let me go ahead and get rid of my I variable. I'm not going to need that anymore. I'm going to be using input instead. And then here what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a prompt for the user to ask them to type something in. So let's say, please enter a command. Or enter quit to leave. Next line, I'm going to actually get the data from the user. So I'm going to write input equals scan dot next. So this will make Java look at the keyboard and get the next word and put that into the input variable. And we can even echo that back out. So let's write another statement here, and we'll just print it back out. So let's say you have entered, and then we'll make it print out that variable. So it'll just echo back whatever we type. If this was a full system, we'd have some more complicated stuff going on, but this is enough for now. And then over here, we'll change our conditional to be a check to see whether input is equal to quit, right? That's what we said it would be in order to leave this loop. So I'll write input dot equals quit. And really what I need to do here is put an exclamation point in front of this, right? I need to do a negation, right? So as long as the input doesn't equal quit, then I want a loop, right? That's my condition that lets me exit out. If I don't type that, then it's still going to continue going on and on and on. So let's compile this and run it and see what we get. So here we get the prompt. Please enter a command. And I'm going to type in the word test. And it echoes back the word test. Let's type in another thing. Let's type in Java. Echoes back Java. And then I type quit. That now leaves the program. Notice there's no more flashing cursor there asking me to enter in another word. The key thing to notice is that because we use a do while loop, this code over here, right, the code side of the loop, that executed before I ever checked if input was quit, right? We only check input after this loop has run, after input has been set to whatever the user types. It doesn't make sense for me to have the check over here, right, to check to see whether input is equal to quit. It doesn't make any sense for me to have it over here on line 9, because at that point, the user hasn't even entered anything in. The input variable is essentially blank, right? There's nothing there yet. So it doesn't make any sense. A do loop will solve that problem since it makes sure that that code inside of the loop executes before the check is run, right? We know that this is going to be executed, therefore input will have some value in it, and this check will be legal.